Standing atop the famed Mount of Olives and gazing across the Kidron Valley, one of Israel's most iconic shrines catches the eye of every visitor. Visible for miles, the Golden Dome of the Rock is an Islamic shrine situated on top of one of the Jews' holiest of sites. Known to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif and to the Jews as the Jewish Temple Mount, this 1.5 million square foot platform is one of the most contested pieces of real estate in the entire world. But 2,000 years ago, it was home to a glorious and majestic temple built by King Herod the Great, a temple destroyed in the year AD 70 and whose stones are now telling the story of a long ago past. But what are these stones telling us about the history of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem? And what role did Jesus of Nazareth have in predicting its destruction? To answer those questions, we've assembled a team to examine and explore the mysteries of the temple. We've been poring through the works of history, surveying the archaeological record, researching the scholarly work of others, and documenting the evidence. Our quest brought us to Jerusalem, and we are walking among the ruins of the Jewish temple which once graced the ancient hill of Zion. We are retracing the steps of Jesus, Solomon, and the priest of Israel. We've recreated the temple, and we are telling again the story of Israel's sacred house of worship. Follow along with us as we investigate the mysteries of the temple both then and now. The writing of the Jewish Talmud declares that whoever has not seen Herod's temple has not seen a beautiful building in his life. Construction of that temple began in the year 23 BC, but it had its roots all the way back to the time of the Exodus in 1446 BC, when God led the Israelites out of their Egyptian bondage and into the wilderness of Sinai. As a means of dwelling among His people, God instructed Israel to build a tabernacle, and this movable shrine became the central place of worship for the Jews, and likewise served as a place for fellowship with both God and other Israelites. Described in the book of Exodus, this tent-like structure was designed with a courtyard, holy place, and a holy of holies. The perimeter of the curtain wall was approximately 150 feet long by 75 feet wide. A portion of that courtyard contained a bronze altar for sacrifices, a laver for ritual cleansing, while the latter two-thirds contained the tent of meeting. Inside the tent was the holy place, which had a table for bread, a golden lampstand, and an altar of incense. The holy place also contained a beautifully crafted curtain hanging on 4 golden pillars, which separated it from the perfectly shaped cube of the Holy of Holies, where the sacred Ark of the Covenant was housed. This was also the place where the high priest came to meet with God when his presence came to rest above the cherubim. In the 10th century BC, the tabernacle eventually came to reside on a hill north of Jerusalem, where on a threshing floor purchased by King David, Solomon erected for it a permanent home. Throughout its history, this mountain came to be known by many names, but none more descriptive when it simply came to be known as the Temple Mount. Bounded on the east by the Kidron and on the west by the Central Valley, the famed structure known as the Sacred Temple of the Jews was elaborate and beautiful. Its design and furnishings were described in intricate detail in the books of Chronicles and Kings. Today, it is known as the First Temple, and some argue that portions of it can still be seen in the walls along the eastern slope. In 586 BC, the Babylonians destroyed this sacred temple along with much of Jerusalem. Evidence of that destruction can still be seen on the eastern slopes of the city of David, where Israeli archaeologist Yigal Shiloh discovered arrowheads and layers of ash within the remains of residential quarters and government buildings. The conquered and beleaguered Jews were then carried away as slaves, but eventually they returned some 70 years later to once again build their house of worship. This began the next phase of its storied history, known today as the Second Temple period. According to the books of Ezra and Haggai, this Second Temple paled in its beauty and grandeur compared to the Temple of Solomon. Centuries later, all of that began to change when King Herod the Great began to renovate and expand the temple in Jerusalem, making it one of the great wonders of the world, and one that even mesmerized the disciples of Jesus, who had remarked, "What wonderful buildings and stones." But Herod's wonderful buildings of that temple did not last for long. In AD 70, the grand temple of the Jews was destroyed yet again. On this occasion, the Roman general Titus laid siege to the city and robbed the temple of its lavish furnishings. The looting and victory march back to Rome and up to Capitoline Hill were memorialized in the well-known Arch of Titus. Carved on one of its interior walls is a depiction of Roman figures carrying in triumphal procession the menorah and table of showbread. But the Roman soldiers and slaves had not only stripped the temple of its sacred items, they also dismantled it as well and pushed many of the stones over the side of its foundational walls to the streets below. In a fascinating foretelling of the future, Jesus of Nazareth had actually predicted this destruction and declared that not one stone would be left standing upon another. That prophecy was fulfilled. And as a result of the Roman siege and destruction that followed, the buildings on the Temple Mount were completely dismantled. In the late 1960s and the early 70s, when archaeologists like Dan Bahat and Benjamin Mazar excavated this area on the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, what they found were huge Herodian stones that had been pushed off by the Romans into the Central Valley. Those stones came from the top of the Kotel and were part of the Temple Mount complex. In the midst of all of this destruction, there were numerous artifacts that were found, one of which was a cornice that came from the royal stoa on top of the southwestern corner. The inscription reads, "The place of trumpeting." The royal stoa and those beautifully adorned buildings of the temple no longer exist. The stately colonnaded porches have disappeared, and the temple buildings, which had once captivated the disciples of Jesus, are completely in ruin. The prophecy of Jesus had come true. Today, the Islamic Dome of the Rock, constructed in 685 AD, has taken the place of the temple's inner sanctuary, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque sits where the royal stoa had proudly bejeweled the Jerusalem skyline. Trying to piece together what the temple looked like for modern-day visitors, it's really difficult because as you look out over these facilities and the mosques that are here in the Western Wall, man, it's hard to sort of imagine where it was. But thanks to archaeology, thanks to the writings of ancient history, we now know where the entryways were and where the various biblical events described, especially in the New Testament, all took place. The Bible, the Mishnah, the works of Josephus, along with the discoveries of archaeology, can aid us in recreating a virtual temple from the time of Jesus. All of this information is giving then the modern explorer the ability to marvel at its stones and its buildings, just as the disciples of Jesus did some 2,000 years ago. Because of the connections being made between faith and the facts of science, we now have a better understanding of the overall history of this place and the prophecies made by Jesus. But as we shall see, there is much more to be revealed as we continue our quest to discover the mysteries of the sacred temple both then and now.